My daughter kicked me out of her wedding because I ruined the aesthetic. So I took back her $380,000 penthouse. She wanted me gone? Fine, now she's homeless. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Elena Vance. I'm 55 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been the kind of woman who just gets things done. No drama, no complaining. You wake up, you work, you take care of the people who need you. That's it. That's the whole philosophy. It was a Tuesday night, a little past 10, and I was still at the commercial kitchen I rent downtown, scrubbing down the last of the hotel pans from a corporate event I'd catered that day. 90 plates of braised short rib, a vegetarian option nobody ordered, and a client who wanted the centerpieces changed twice. Standard stuff, honestly. My back was aching in that dull, familiar way it does now, the kind of ache that doesn't go away with stretching anymore. It just goes quiet until tomorrow. I run my own catering company. Started it from absolutely nothing 8 years ago, back when my ex-husband Arthur decided that the best way to handle a failed business and a mountain of debt was to just leave. Not dramatically. No big fight, no slam doors. He just packed a bag one weekend while I was at my mother's and left a note on the kitchen counter. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Arthur. He's not really the point of this story. I'll just say that when he left, he took his half of nothing, and I was the one who had to figure out how to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table for our daughter. Her name is Chloe. She was 16 when Arthur left. Old enough to understand what was happening, young enough that I still felt like I had to protect her from most of it. So I did what a lot of single mothers do. I put my head down and I worked. I started small, doing appetizer trays for neighbors' parties, then birthday cakes, then full events. Within a few years, Vance Catering was actually a name people recognized in this city. I'm proud of that. I don't say it to brag, I say it because it matters to the story. Everything that happened later happened because I built something real with my own 2 hands. Anyway, back to that Tuesday night. I was drying my hands on a dish towel, thinking about nothing more complicated than whether I had enough energy left to stop at the grocery store on my way home when my phone started buzzing on the steel counter. I glanced at the screen. Chloe. Now, here's something you should understand about me and my daughter, and I want to say this clearly because it's going to matter later. When Chloe calls, I answer. Doesn't matter what time it is. Doesn't matter how tired I am. That's just how it's been for 8 years. She's the only family I've got left that still needs me, and some part of me, I'll be honest, some part of me likes being needed. It fills something up. I wiped my hands again and picked up the phone. Hey, sweetheart, I said, propping it between my shoulder and my ear so I could keep tidying up. You're up late. There was a pause before she answered, not a long one. Just enough that I noticed it. Hi, Ma, she said. Her voice had that particular tone I'd come to recognize over the years. Light, a little too casual, like she was trying to make something sound smaller than it actually was. I know it's late. I wanted to catch you before you got home. Are you driving? No, I'm still at the kitchen. What's going on? Another pause. In the background, I could hear the low hum of a television, maybe a roommate's voice somewhere far off. Nothing bad, she said quickly, like she could feel me tensing up through the phone. I promise, nothing bad. I need to ask you something, and I don't really want to do it over the phone. I stopped wiping down the counter. 22 years of being her mother had taught me exactly what that sentence meant. Chloe didn't call at 10 at night to chat about her day. And she definitely didn't say I don't want to do it over the phone unless there was a number attached to whatever came next. Okay, I said slowly, turning off the kitchen lights one by one, my keys already in my other hand. You want to come by this weekend? Actually, she said, And I could hear her smiling now. That particular Chloe smile I could picture without even seeing her face. "Can I come by tomorrow? I'll bring dinner." I stood there in the dark of the empty kitchen for a second, phone still against my ear, and something in my chest did the thing it always did before I even had words for it. A small tightening, followed almost immediately by the automatic yes, of course, whatever you need that I'd trained myself into over 8 years of being the only parent standing. "Tomorrow works," I said. "I'll be home by 7. "Perfect," she said. "Love you, Ma." She hung up before I could even get the words back to her. I stood there in the parking lot a minute longer than I needed to, keys in hand, staring at my phone like it might tell me something the conversation hadn't. She showed up the next evening with a bag of Thai takeout, which should have been my first clue. Chloe doesn't do takeout unless she's trying to soften something. We ate at my kitchen table, the same scratched-up table I've had since before she was born, and for a while we just talked about normal things. Her roommate situation, a professor she couldn't stand, whether I'd tried the new noodle place on 5th. It was easy, comfortable, the kind of dinner I looked forward to all week. Then, somewhere between the pad thai and the last spring roll, she set her fork down. "So, Ma, I don't want this to be weird," she said, "but I'm kind of drowning a little. Financially, I mean." I already knew where this was going. I'd known since she called last night, but I let her say it anyway, because that's what you do. "Drowning how?" "Books this semester were insane, like $400 insane. And my roommate bailed on the lease, so now I'm covering the whole rent by myself until I find someone new." She said it fast, almost like a list, the way you rehearse something in the car before you say it out loud. "I've been picking up shifts at the coffee place, but it's not really covering it." She was 20 at the time, second year of college. And I remember looking at her across that table. My daughter, tired around the eyes in a way that made her look older than she was. And something in me just switched on. Not a decision exactly, more like a reflex. "How much do you need?" "I don't know. Maybe 800? I feel really bad asking." "Don't feel bad." I was already getting up, already reaching for my purse on the counter. "You're my daughter. This is what I'm here for." I want to pause here and be honest with you, because I think it matters. I didn't ask her for a budget. I didn't ask what she'd spent her work-study money on, or why the books cost that much, or whether she'd looked into a payment plan with the school. I didn't ask anything, really. I just wrote the check. And looking back now, that's the part I keep circling back to. Not the money itself, but how automatic it was. Like breathing. Chloe hugged me hard when I handed it to her, the way she used to when she was little and I'd let her stay up an extra hour. "You're the best, Ma. Seriously. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd figure it out," I said, laughing a little. "You always do." But even as I said it, some quiet part of me knew that wasn't really true anymore. Not because she was helpless. Chloe's never been helpless. She's sharp, resourceful, when she wants to be. It's more that she'd stopped expecting to have to figure it out. Somewhere along the way, over dozens of these small conversations. A car repair here, a broken laptop there, a just this once. That happened every few months. Asking me for money had become as normal as asking to borrow the car. It wasn't a big deal to her. It wasn't something she had to work up the courage for. It was just Tuesday. I didn't think about that too hard at the time, though. I was just glad I could help. That's the job, right? That's what I told myself. We finished dinner and she stayed another hour, scrolling through wedding Pinterest boards on her phone for fun. She'd just started dating someone new, hadn't told me much about him yet. Showing me dresses and venues like it was some far-off fantasy game. Nothing real. I liked seeing her like that. Light. Unburdened. Then her phone buzzed on the table and her whole posture changed. "Oh, shoot. I gotta go, Ma. Someone's waiting for me downstairs." She was already pulling her jacket on, gathering her bag, moving toward the door with that quick, distracted energy she gets when her mind's already somewhere else. "Who's waiting?" "Just a friend. I'll call you this weekend, okay? Love you. Thank you so much. You're a lifesaver." And then the door was closing behind her, and I was standing in my kitchen alone with 2 empty takeout containers and a checkbook with a fresh gap in it, smiling that small, tired smile. You smile when your kid leaves in a hurry and you don't quite know why it stings a little. The bank statement was sitting on my kitchen counter, and I'd been staring at the same number for about 10 minutes without actually doing anything about it. January's always slow for catering. Nobody's throwing parties right after the holidays. Everybody's broke from Christmas. And corporate clients don't start booking their spring events until February at the earliest. I knew this. Every year, I knew this. Didn't make it easier. I did the math again, just to torture myself. 2 bookings that month. 1 retirement party, 1 baby shower. After I paid my part-time staff and covered the rental fee on the kitchen space, I'd cleared maybe $1,100. My mortgage alone was more than that. Here's the thing about running your own business for 8 years. You get good at finding money you didn't think you had. I had a small emergency fund, nothing fancy, just a separate savings account I'd been feeding a little at a time since the divorce, back when I promised myself I'd never again be a woman who didn't have options. That month, like a few months before it, I dipped into it. Paid the mortgage, covered the electric bill, kept the lights on. Literally. I didn't tell anyone. Not my sister, not my friend Marta, who I usually vent to over coffee. And definitely not Chloe. It's funny, the habits you build without meaning to. I don't remember deciding, one specific day, that I wasn't going to tell my daughter when things were tight. It just became the pattern. She'd call and ask how work was, and I'd say, "Busy, good," even in months like this one where busy meant 2 events, and good meant I hadn't missed a payment yet. There was something almost automatic about it, the same way saying yes to her requests had become automatic. I protected her from the version of me that struggled. She only ever got to see the version that had it handled. I think part of it was pride, if I'm honest. I'd worked too hard building this business to let her see the cracks. And part of it, and this is the part I didn't examine closely enough back then, was that if she knew things were tight, she might stop asking me for help. And some small, stubborn part of me didn't want that. Being needed was the thing that made the hard months feel like they meant something. So I kept it to myself, the way I always did. I went to the grocery store and bought the cheaper cuts of meat for myself, while still stocking my events with the good stuff my clients paid for. I put off getting my car's brakes checked for another month, telling myself the squeaking wasn't that bad yet. Small sacrifices, nothing dramatic. Just the quiet math of keeping everything looking fine from the outside. A couple weeks later, business picked back up a little. A wedding shower and 2 corporate lunches, and the tight feeling in my chest loosened some. That's how it always went. Lean month, then a better one, then lean again. You ride it out. You don't make it anyone else's problem. I was folding laundry on a Thursday night, half watching some cooking competition show I wasn't even really following, when my phone lit up on the couch cushion next to me. A text from Chloe. I picked it up, expecting the usual. A meme, a question about a recipe, maybe a photo of something she'd baked and wanted my opinion on. Instead, it just said, "Ma, I want to tell you something big next week. Can we do dinner Friday?" No emoji. No exclamation point. That alone was unusual enough to make me sit up a little straighter on the couch. I typed back, "Everything okay?" 3 little dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Everything's great, actually," she wrote back finally. "I just want to tell you in person." Friday work? I looked at that message for a long moment, thumb hovering over the screen, that same reflexive tightening starting up in my chest again. The one that had nothing to do with money this time. She showed up to dinner Friday with her laptop tucked under her arm, which was strange enough on its own. Chloe doesn't bring her laptop to family dinners. She brings her phone, sure, but the laptop meant something. A presentation. A plan. Okay, don't freak out, she said, before I'd even gotten my coat off. But I need to show you something. That's usually the thing people say right before I freak out. She laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, the kind she used to do before piano recitals when she was little. We sat down at the table, and instead of dinner, she opened the laptop and turned it toward me. So, I graduate in 3 weeks. I know, sweetheart, I bought the ticket for the ceremony already. Right, but here's the thing. She took a breath. I'm not going to apply for jobs. Like office jobs, marketing jobs, whatever. I know that's probably what you were expecting, and I know Dad. Well, I don't know what Dad thinks. I don't talk to him. But I wanted to tell you first. Before anyone. I sat back a little. Okay. So what are you going to do instead? She turned the screen fully toward me, and there it was. A whole mood board, color palettes, a logo sketch, product photos pulled from other boutiques for reference, soft neutrals, gold lettering. At the top, in a clean serif font, Chloe and Ren. I want to open a boutique, she said. Women's clothing, some accessories, maybe expand into homeware eventually. I've been planning this for months, Ma. Not just some random idea. I've got supplier contacts. I've done market research on the neighborhood I want. She kept going, and I'll admit, I got a little swept up in it. There was something about watching her talk like that. Fast, bright-eyed, flipping through slides she'd clearly stayed up nights building. That reminded me of myself at her age, before I knew how hard any of it actually was. She'd thought about the branding. She'd thought about the customer experience. What she hadn't thought about, as far as I could tell from that mood board, was cash flow, or lease terms, or what happens in month 4 when the initial excitement wears off and the bills don't stop coming. I didn't say any of that out loud. Not yet. This is really impressive, Chloe, I said, and I meant it. You've clearly put a lot of work into this, right? I mean, I know it's a risk. Everyone keeps telling me to just get a normal job first, build savings, whatever. But I feel like if I don't do this now, while I don't have a mortgage or kids or anything tying me down, I'm never going to do it. There was a small knot forming in my chest as she talked. Something I recognized but wasn't ready to name out loud at that table. Part of it was pride. Genuine pride, watching my daughter dream this big. And part of it was that quiet, practical voice in the back of my head, the one that had spent 8 years learning the hard way what happens when passion runs ahead of a plan. Have you thought about starting smaller? I asked carefully. Like, an online shop first? See how it does before committing to a lease? I mean, yeah, I thought about it, she said, a little defensive now. But online stores don't have the same impact. People need to walk in, touch the fabric, feel the space. That's the whole brand experience I'm going for. I nodded slowly, not fully convinced, but not wanting to be the mother who crushed her daughter's dream in the first 5 minutes of hearing about it either. So I asked the questions I knew how to ask. About suppliers, about the space she had in mind, about how she planned to handle the slow months. Because in retail, just like in catering, there are always slow months. She had some answers. Not all of them, but some. Enough to make it clear she'd genuinely thought about this, even if she hadn't lived through the parts you only learn by doing. We talked for almost 2 hours. The food I'd made got cold on the stove, and neither of us cared. By the end of it, something had shifted in her voice. The presentation energy faded, and what was left underneath it sounded smaller, more honest. She closed the laptop halfway, fidgeting with the edge of it, not quite looking at me. Ma, she said, quieter now. Kind of the reason I wanted to tell you in person is, I've done the math on startup costs. Lease deposit, initial inventory, build-out, all of it. Okay. It comes out to around $55,000. She said the number fast, like ripping off a bandage. And I mean, I don't have anywhere close to that saved up yet. The room got quiet for a second. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the tick of the clock over the stove. I didn't answer right away. $55,000 isn't the kind of number you respond to on instinct, not even for your own daughter. I sat there for a second and I could see her watching my face, trying to read it, the same way she used to watch me before asking if she could stay out past curfew. That's a big number, Chloe, I said finally. I know it is. She pulled the laptop back toward herself, almost protectively, like she thought I was about to say no. I wasn't expecting you to say yes right away or anything. I wanted you to know the real number. I didn't want to lowball it and then come back in 3 months asking for more. That actually landed well with me. It was the most grown-up thing she'd said all night. I got up and refilled both our water glasses, mostly just to give myself a minute to think. Standing at the sink, looking out at my dark backyard, I ran the numbers the way I run numbers for every event I cater. What's the risk? What's the return? What happens if it fails? $55,000 was most of what I had left in savings. Outside of the emergency fund I never touched unless I had to. It wasn't nothing. It wasn't a small ask. But when I turned back around and looked at her sitting there at my kitchen table, laptop open, mood board still glowing on the screen, I thought about 8 years of doing this alone. Of raising a daughter who came out the other side of her parents' divorce, still soft enough to dream this big, still brave enough to want something and say it out loud. That counted for something. That counted for a lot, actually. Tell me again about the location, I said, sitting back down. And she did. This time slower, less like a pitch and more like an actual conversation. She told me about the little strip near the farmer's market, foot traffic on weekends, a landlord who seemed reasonable about a short-term lease to start. She showed me photos of fabric samples she'd already picked out, told me about a wholesale contact she'd met through a friend from her retail internship last summer. It wasn't perfect. There were gaps I could see even without trying. No real cushion for a slow first quarter. No clear answer when I asked what she'd do if the lease fell through. But there was real thought in it, too. Real work. This wasn't a whim. We ended up talking for almost 3 hours. At some point, I heated up the dinner that had gone cold, and we ate standing at the counter because neither of us wanted to stop the conversation long enough to sit back down properly. She laughed more that night than I'd heard her laugh in months. I laughed too. It felt, for a little while, like it used to feel when she was small and would drag me into her games without asking, and I'd just go along because being pulled into her world was the best part of my day. By the time she was gathering her things to leave, something in me had already settled. Not because the business plan was flawless. It wasn't. But because I trusted her. And because some part of me still believed that betting on your kid is different than betting on a stranger. You do it because you love them, and because you'd rather regret helping than regret not trying. Chloe, I said, and she stopped by the door, keys already in her hand. Yeah? I'll help you with the $55,000. Her whole face lit up, and she started to cross the kitchen toward me, arms already opening for a hug, but I held up a hand, just slightly, enough to pause her. But I want us to do this properly, I said. Not just a check and a handshake. I want to draw up an actual agreement. Terms, repayment, equity, all of it. In writing. Her arms dropped a little, the excitement in her face flickering into something more like confusion. Wait, like a contract? Between us? The lawyer's office was on the 4th floor of a building I'd used once before, years back. when I was setting up the LLC for my catering business. Same navy carpet, same smell of coffee and printer toner. Chloe sat next to me in the waiting room, knee bouncing, scrolling her phone without really looking at it. "You didn't have to book this so fast," she said, not looking up. "Like, we could have just done a simple thing online. There are templates." "I know there are templates," I said. "I want it done properly." She didn't argue, but I could feel her mood shift, that particular quiet she gets when she's annoyed but doesn't want to say so outright. When they called us back, she followed me into the office a step behind, arms crossed loosely, the way you stand when you're not quite sure you want to be somewhere. The lawyer's name was Nadia, a woman about my age with reading glasses pushed up into gray, streaked hair. She'd handled my business paperwork for years and I trusted her. She laid out the basics of what I wanted: a formal loan structured as an equity investment, $55,000, a repayment plan tied to the boutique's profits, and a small equity stake for me in the business itself. Not controlling, just enough to make it real. Enough that if something happened, there'd be a paper trail, terms, protection for both of us. Chloe sat there through most of it fairly quiet, answering when asked directly, but her jaw was tight. About 20 minutes in, when Nadia stepped out to print a draft, Chloe finally turned to me. "Ma, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why does it have to be like this?" She kept her voice low, glancing at the closed door. "Like, I get wanting it in writing. Fine, whatever. But equity? A repayment schedule? You're talking about this like I'm some random startup you're investing in. It's just us. It's just you and me." I understood why she felt that way. I really did. There's something that feels almost insulting about formalizing love, about putting a signature where a hug used to be enough. But I'd learned things over the years, watched friends lend money to siblings, to grown children, and watched it quietly rot the relationship when nobody remembered who owed what, or when one person felt entitled and the other felt used, and nobody had ever written down what help was actually supposed to look like. "I'm not treating you like a stranger," I said. "I'm protecting both of us. You too, Chloe. If this business does well, this agreement protects your ownership just as much as it protects my investment. And if it doesn't do well, I need you to hear this part. If it doesn't do well, I need us to already know how we're going to handle that. Before it happens. Not after. When we're upset and guessing." She was quiet for a second, looking down at her hands. "It just feels weird. Signing something with my own mom like we're doing a business deal." "It is a business deal," I said gently. "That doesn't mean it isn't also love. Both things can be true." She didn't look totally convinced, but she didn't push back further either. When Nadia came back in with the printed draft, we went through it line by line. The loan amount, the 10% equity stake, the repayment terms tied to quarterly revenue, a default clause in case the business failed or was sold. "Standard language," Nadia said. "Every investor uses something like it." Chloe signed first, her signature small and a little rushed, like she wanted to get it over with. I watched her cap the pen and slide the papers toward me without quite meeting my eyes. I picked up the pen and signed my own name slowly, deliberately, right below hers. Not because I doubted her, because I'd learned the hard way that the people you trust the most are exactly the people you need the clearest paperwork with, not in spite of the love, but because of it. "There," I said, sliding the pages back across the desk toward Nadia. "Now we both know exactly where we stand." Chloe managed a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Guess we're business partners now, huh?" The morning of the grand opening, I got there at 7 to help set up, still in my work clothes because I'd catered a breakfast event before driving straight over. Chloe had strung little gold lights across the front window, and there was a table near the register with sparkling cider in plastic champagne flutes, because apparently that was the aesthetic. Elegant but approachable, she'd explained to me at least 3 times. "Ma, does the window display look okay from the street?" she asked, practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Be honest." I stepped outside, looked back at it. The mannequins in soft cream and blush tones, the Chloe and Ren logo stenciled gold on the glass, and felt something swell up in my chest that I hadn't expected to feel that strongly. "It looks beautiful, sweetheart," I said, and I meant every word of it. By 10, when the doors officially opened, there were already a dozen people waiting outside, mostly her friends from college, a couple of neighbors from the block, a woman from the local paper who wrote a small business column and had agreed to stop by. I stood near the back for most of it, restocking the cider table, making sure nobody's flute stayed empty for long. Old habits from years of catering events. I couldn't help myself. Chloe was glowing. I don't know how else to describe it. She moved through that little shop like she'd been doing it her whole life, greeting people, explaining fabric choices, laughing easily. At one point, I watched her help an older woman find the right size in a cardigan, patient and warm, and thought, there it is. She's actually good at this. Somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, I ended up next to a young woman named Priya, one of Chloe's college friends, both of us reorganizing a display table that customers had picked through. "She talks about you all the time, you know," Priya said, folding a scarf. "Like, all the time. She's so lucky to have a mom like you backing her up on this." "She worked hard for it," I said. "I just helped." Priya smiled and kept folding. "Oh, did she tell you about Julian yet?" I blinked. "Julian?" "Guy she met at that gallery opening a few weeks ago. I think they've been texting nonstop. I keep telling her to just ask him out already, but you know how she gets." Priya laughed, waved a hand. "Anyway, don't tell her I said anything, she'll kill me." I filed the name away without thinking much of it. A name mentioned in passing at a busy shop opening. Nothing more. I had no way of knowing then how much that one word, Julian, would come to matter later. The opening was, by any measure, a success. She sold out of 3 different items by closing time. The newspaper woman promised a nice write-up. When I finally left that evening, tired in the good way, Chloe hugged me at the door and said, "We did it, Ma." And I remember thinking, "No, sweetheart, you did it." Even though I knew my name was quietly attached to every dollar that had made the day possible. For the first couple of months after that, things looked genuinely good. She'd send me photos of new inventory, screenshots of nice reviews online, a video of a local influencer wearing one of her dresses. I'd call her most Sundays, and she'd talk fast and excited about slow season plans, about maybe adding a small home goods corner by fall. I let myself relax into it. I let myself believe the hard part, the scary, uncertain part, was behind us. Which is why it caught my attention, a few months in, when our Sunday calls started getting shorter. Not dramatically, just shorter. A little less detail about the shop. More questions about my own week, redirected quickly, like she wanted to keep the conversation away from a certain topic without actually saying so. I told myself it was nothing. Business slows down after the launch, buzz fades. That's normal. Every retailer knows that. I figured she was just tired or busy, or maybe a little embarrassed about a quieter month here and there. I didn't push. Sunday came around again, and I called at the usual time, 6 o'clock, right after I'd finished cleaning up from a small event I'd catered that afternoon. It rang 4 times before she picked up. "Hey, Ma." Her voice sounded flat, a little distracted, like she was doing 3 things at once. "Hey, sweetheart. How was the week?" "Fine. Busy." A pause. I could hear something in the background. maybe a TV, maybe just static. How was yours? I told her about the event. Some minor disaster with a broken warmer that I'd managed to fix with a borrowed extension cord and a lot of luck. She laughed at the right places, but it felt thin, like she was laughing because she knew she was supposed to, not because she was actually there with me in the moment. How's the shop? I asked, the way I always did. Good. Fine. Another pause, shorter this time. Same as always. That was new. Usually there was something, a new fabric she'd found, a customer story, some small win or complaint. Same as always? Wasn't a Chloe answer. Chloe always had details. Anything exciting happen this week? Not really. It's been slow, but that's normal for this time of year, right? Everyone's saying retail always dips in the fall before the holiday rush. She said it fast, like she'd rehearsed the sentence, or maybe read it somewhere, and was repeating it back to convince herself as much as me. Sure, I said slowly. That tracks. We talked another few minutes, but it felt like walking on a floor that wasn't quite solid. Every time I asked a follow-up question, she'd answer just enough to satisfy it and then steer us somewhere else. How's my knee? Have I been resting it? Did I see that thing on the news? Small talk, dressed up to look like connection. When we hung up, I sat there on my couch for a minute, phone still warm in my hand, feeling something I couldn't quite name. Not worry, exactly. Not yet. More like the way you notice a smell that's slightly off in your own kitchen. Nothing you can point to. Just a sense that something had shifted. This went on for about 3 weeks. Same pattern each Sunday. Shorter calls, vaguer answers, a subtle redirect every time the conversation drifted toward the shop. I told myself I was reading too much into it. She was 23, running her own business. Of course she was tired. Of course some weeks she didn't want to talk shop with her mother. That's normal. Healthy even. But mothers notice things. That's not a cliché. It's just true. You spend 20-some years paying close attention to a person, and your body remembers the rhythm of them even when your mind is trying to talk you out of it. I finally asked her directly, one Sunday, no easing into it. Chloe, is everything okay with the shop? You've seemed off the last few weeks. There was a pause, just a beat too long before she answered. Yeah, Ma, I'm fine. It's just busy. I'm tired, that's all. Her voice had an edge to it now. Faint, but there. The tone of someone who wanted the question to stop. You don't have to worry about me. I'm not worried, I gotta go. Someone just walked in. Talk later. Love you. And she was gone before I could say it back. I sat there with the phone against my chest for a second, that same uneasy feeling settling in deeper this time. The following Tuesday, I had a delivery to make near her neighborhood, a cake for a client 2 blocks over from the shop, and on impulse, without calling ahead, I decided to swing by. Just to say hi. Just to see her face. Maybe bring her lunch. The kind of thing I used to do all the time before all this started. The little bell over the door jingled the same way it always had. But the shop itself didn't look the same at all. Half the racks near the front were bare. The mannequins that used to be dressed in full seasonal outfits stood in the window wearing mismatched pieces, like someone had been pulling stock and hadn't gotten around to restocking it. The shelf where she used to display new arrivals, always full, always rotating, had maybe 6 items left on it, spaced out to look less empty than it was. Chloe came out from the back room when the bell rang, and the second she saw me standing there with a grocery bag in my hand, staring at the half-empty racks, her face did something I'll never forget. It wasn't surprise. It was closer to getting caught. Ma, what are you doing here? I had a delivery 2 blocks over. Thought I'd bring you lunch. I held up the bag, feeling suddenly foolish for how normal that sentence sounded next to what I was actually looking at. Chloe, what happened to your inventory? She glanced around the shop like she was seeing it fresh too, like she'd been avoiding really looking at it herself. I sold off some stock, trying to free up cash flow. Free up cash flow for what? She didn't answer right away. She walked over and flipped the sign on the door to closed, even though it was barely 2 in the afternoon, and locked it behind her. That, more than anything, told me this wasn't going to be a quick conversation. "Can we sit down?" she said. We sat on the little velvet bench she used for fitting customers, right in the middle of that half-empty shop, and she was quiet for a long moment, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. "The shop's not doing well," she finally said. "It hasn't been doing well for a while." "How long is a while?" "Since summer." Her voice cracked a little on the word. "Maybe even before that." I felt something drop in my chest, but I kept my voice level. "Okay, tell me what's going on." And she did. Finally, the whole thing spilling out once the dam broke. Foot traffic had slowed after the opening buzz wore off. A competitor had opened 2 blocks away with lower prices. She'd over-ordered inventory for a fall line that didn't sell the way she'd projected, and instead of cutting her losses early, she'd kept ordering more, hoping the next shipment, the next season, would turn it around. She'd fallen behind on rent twice. She'd been quietly selling off stock at a loss, just to make the minimum payments. "I didn't want to tell you," she said. And now the tears were coming. Angry and frustrated more than sad. "I didn't want you to think I failed. You worked so hard to get me this money and I ran it into the ground, Ma. I don't even know how to say it any other way." I reached over and put my hand on her back, rubbing slow circles the way I used to when she was small and upset about something that felt enormous at the time and turned out to be nothing. This didn't feel like nothing, but my job in that moment wasn't to make it worse. "I'm not angry," I said, and I meant it mostly. "Businesses fail, Chloe. It happens to people who work twice as hard as you did. This isn't about you being a failure." "Then what happens now?" she asked, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I can't pay you back. Not even close. I don't have it." This was the part I'd been dreading since the moment I saw those empty racks, because I knew it was coming, and I still didn't have a clean way to say it. "You remember the agreement we signed?" I said carefully. "With Nadia. The one with the default clause." Chloe went very still. "That agreement exists exactly for this," I continued, keeping my voice steady, gentle. "It's not a punishment, sweetheart. It's what protects both of us when things don't go the way we hoped. It lays out what happens next. Whether that's a repayment plan or the business assets or—" "Wait." She pulled back slightly, staring at me like I'd slapped her. "Ma, are you serious right now? You're seriously going to use that contract on me?" "I'm not going to bankrupt you over a boutique, Chloe," I said. "That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the contract exists, so we don't have to guess what happens next. We already agreed on it, back when we were both thinking clearly." She was still crying, but quieter now, the anger draining into something more like exhaustion. In the end, closing the shop turned out to be the only real option. We spent the next few weeks doing it together, liquidating what was left of the inventory at deep discounts, breaking the lease with a penalty fee that ate up almost everything the fire sale brought in, boxing up the fixtures to sell secondhand. It was quiet work, mostly. Not much talking. Just 2 people folding sweaters into bins in a shop that used to feel like the future, and now just felt like an ending. Under the terms of the agreement, what remained of the business assets came to me, along with a repayment plan for what the equity had been worth going forward. Modest, tied to whatever income she'd have down the road, nothing that would actually collect on right away. I wasn't trying to squeeze money out of a closed store. I just wanted it documented. On paper, for both of us. The bigger problem was practical. She'd been living off shop income for the better part of a year, and once the doors closed, So did her ability to pay rent on the tiny studio she'd been renting near downtown. She mentioned, almost in passing one night on the phone, that she was thinking about a roommate situation, maybe something further out where rent was cheaper, maybe closer to her old college friends. I thought about that for a few days. About her, 23 years old, having just watched her first real dream collapse, about to also lose the stability of her own address on top of it. That felt like too much all at once. Too much to ask a person to absorb in a single season. So I did something I hadn't fully planned to do, not in any concrete way, until I was already doing it. I started looking at listings, not rentals, purchases. I had savings I'd been building for years, separate from what I'd loaned her for the shop. Money I'd always thought of vaguely as someday money, retirement cushion, rainy day fund grown large. I found a place downtown, a clean one-bedroom in a decent building with good security, and after 2 weeks of back and forth with a realtor, I bought it outright. $380,000, closing costs included. I put the deed in my own name. That part felt important to me, though I didn't examine too closely why at the time. Some instinct, maybe, left over from the boutique. Some quiet decision that I wasn't going to hand over ownership of anything that large again without keeping my hand on it. I told myself it was just practical. Cleaner paperwork, better protection, easier to manage if anything ever went wrong. I didn't sit her down and explain all of that, though. When I told her about the apartment, I kept it simple. I found you a place. You won't pay rent while you're getting back on your feet. Just focus on finding your next step. I didn't spell out that it wasn't hers. I didn't walk her through what, in my name, actually meant long-term, what it would mean if things between us ever changed, what rights that gave me that Elise never would have. Looking back, I'm not entirely sure if that was kindness or something more like instinct protecting itself. Maybe both. At the time, it just felt like the natural next thing to leave unsaid. She was hurting. She didn't need a legal lecture. She needed a key and a bed and somewhere quiet to rebuild. When I handed her that key, standing in the empty apartment with afternoon light coming through the windows, she just stood there for a second, looking around at the space. The clean counters, the empty closet waiting to be filled, the view out over the street. Then she turned and wrapped her arms around me so tight I nearly lost my balance. Her face pressed into my shoulder the way it used to when she was a little girl, and something had scared her, and then suddenly wasn't scary anymore. "You're the best mom that's ever existed," she said, muffled against my shoulder, her voice thick with relief. "I mean that. I don't know what I'd do without you." A few weeks after she moved in, I stopped by to drop off some kitchen stuff I'd picked up for her. A good knife set, some pans, things I figured she'd need now that she was cooking for herself in a real kitchen instead of a dorm hot plate. She buzzed me up, and when I walked in, there were already 3 unfamiliar faces sitting on her new couch, laughing at something on someone's phone. "Ma, hey, come in, meet everyone." She waved me over, introduced me quickly. A girl named Sasha, a guy named Marcus, another girl whose name I didn't catch over the noise. They were polite enough, said hello, went back to their conversation a beat later. I set the pans down in the kitchen and started unpacking them, half listening to the chatter from the living room. It was mostly normal 20-something talk. Some show they were all watching, a bar that had just opened, someone's ex who'd shown up somewhere uninvited. Nothing that concerned me. I was glad, honestly, to see her surrounded by people again after months of watching the shop slowly hollow her out. "This place is so cute, Chloe," the one named Sasha said at one point. "Way nicer than my building. Did you say your mom bought this?" "Yeah, she's incredible," Chloe said, and I felt a small warm flush hearing that, even from the kitchen. "She's basically a superhero." I smiled to myself, folding up the empty shopping bags and let the conversation continue without me. That's when I noticed the new candle on the side table. One of those boutique brands, the kind that runs $60, $70 a piece, with a hand-poured wax and a name like Amber Dusk. Next to it sat a small stack of shopping bags from a store I recognized as fairly upscale, tissue paper still poking out of the top. I didn't say anything about it. It wasn't my business what she spent her own money on, and I told myself that firmly, more than once, standing there in her kitchen. When the friends eventually left, I stayed behind to help her put the new pans away, and she was in a good mood, chattier than she'd been in months. "Sasha's actually really connected," she said, stacking mugs into a cabinet. "She knows this whole group of people, like gallery people, some finance guys, this one girl who does event planning for actual celebrities. It's a totally different scene than my college friends, you know? Everyone's just more put together, more going somewhere, if that makes sense." "That's exciting," I said, mostly meaning it, though something in the way she said "more put together" made me pause slightly, like she was measuring herself, or maybe measuring me, against some new scale she'd just discovered. "Yeah, I met this guy through them actually," she added, a little more carefully now, like she was testing how much to share. "Julian. We've hung out a couple times." Julian. The name landed somewhere familiar, though it took me a second to place it. The boutique opening, Priya folding scarves, mentioning a name in passing. So this was the same one. "Tell me about him," I said. "He's really smart. Comes from this old family, kind of a big deal in certain circles. His dad's on like 3 different boards." She said it casually, but there was a slight straightening in her posture as she talked, a certain pride creeping in. "It's just a different world, honestly. The way they talk about things, the way they think about, like, legacy and image and all that. I don't know. I find it interesting." I nodded along, unpacking the last of the pans, not entirely sure what to say to that. Something about the phrase legacy and image sat strangely in my chest, though I couldn't have told you exactly why at the time. It wasn't wrong, what she was describing. People do come from different worlds. But there was something in her tone, a kind of leaning toward it, an eagerness to belong to something bigger than what she'd grown up with, that I noticed and, for reasons I still can't fully explain, chose not to comment on. I finished putting the last mug away and closed the cabinet door a little more firmly than I needed to. "Well," I said, keeping my voice light, "I'd love to meet him sometime, if things get serious." "Definitely," she said, already moving on, checking her phone, the new candle flickering softly on the side table behind her. "I think you'll really like him, Ma." I gathered my things to leave, glancing once more at that little cluster of shopping bags by the door, the tissue paper crinkling faintly in the breeze from the open window, and told myself, again, that it was nothing. Just a young woman enjoying a fresh start. Nothing worth mentioning. The building management office called me directly, not Chloe, because the account was set up under my name from the start. I'd done that on purpose, kept the HOA fees, the maintenance costs, all of it running through me rather than her, without ever really explaining to her why. "Ms. Vance, just confirming the autopay for this month went through," the woman on the phone said. Her name was Denise, and we'd talked enough times by then that she recognized my voice. "Your total for the year so far is right around $18,000, if you want a running summary for your records." I sat at my kitchen table with a pen, jotting the number down on the back of an envelope, the way I did every few months, just to keep track. 18,000, and that wasn't counting the 2 years before that, back when the building had different fees and a smaller maintenance reserve. All told, it had to be pushing $24,000 by now, quietly moved from my account to keep that apartment running the way it should. HOA dues, A special assessment for a new roof the building did, a minor plumbing repair in her unit that I'd paid for out of pocket rather than filing through insurance and dealing with the hassle. Chloe never saw any of these numbers. As far as she knew, the place was just hers. Paid for. Done. A gift she didn't have to think about again. I liked it that way, honestly, more than I probably should admit. There was something almost peaceful about doing this quietly. No thank yous required, no explanations, no watching her face do the math on how much her mother was still holding up behind the scenes. I'd told myself early on that this money wasn't a loan like the boutique had been. This was different. This was supposed to be my gift to her future. A foundation she could stand on without owing anyone anything, without a contract, without pressure. Sometimes I thought about telling her. I'd get close, some Sunday call where she'd mention offhand how lucky she felt to have zero housing costs, and I'd open my mouth, almost say something like, it's not entirely free. There's more going on behind it than you realize. And then I wouldn't. Partly because I didn't want her to feel guilty. Partly, if I'm honest with myself now, because there was something in me that liked being the invisible hand keeping everything steady, the provider nobody had to think about until they needed her, and then she was simply there. I hung up with Denise, tucked the envelope with my scribbled math into a drawer where I kept that kind of thing, and went back to prepping for a wedding I was catering that weekend. Piping buttercream roses onto a 3-tier cake at my kitchen counter, the radio playing low, the kind of quiet, focused evening I'd come to appreciate more as I got older. My phone buzzed around 8, while I still had frosting on my hands. I wiped them on a towel and checked the screen. A text from Chloe. "Ma, I want you to meet someone. Are you free this weekend?" I smiled a little, thinking, of course, this had to be about Julian. She'd mentioned him a handful of times over the last month or so, always a little more warmly than the last, always a little more detail slipping in. Dinners. A weekend trip to visit his family's place upstate. A photo she'd sent once of the two of them at some rooftop event. Both dressed up, both looking, I had to admit, genuinely happy together. "I have the Hendersons' wedding Saturday," I typed back, thumb moving carefully around the buttercream still on my fingers. "Sunday works better." "What's the occasion?" The dots appeared almost instantly this time, like she'd been waiting with the phone in her hand. "Just want you two to finally meet properly," she wrote. "He's kind of a big deal to me, Ma. I really want this to go well." I set the phone down next to the cake stand, looking at those words for a second. Kind of a big deal to me, feeling something warm and a little nervous stir in my chest all at once. The particular feeling of a mother realizing her daughter might be getting serious about someone for the very first time. I picked out my outfit twice that Sunday, which felt a little ridiculous for a woman my age, but there it was. A navy blouse, my good pair of slacks, small pearl earrings that had been my mother's. Nothing flashy. Just neat and put together, the way I'd present myself for any important meeting. Chloe had chosen a restaurant downtown, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a maitre d' who says, "Right this way," instead of just pointing. I got there 5 minutes early out of habit and found them already seated at a corner table, Julian standing when he saw me approach. "Ms. Vance," he said, extending a hand. He was tall, well-dressed in that effortless way that usually means the effort happened somewhere else. Earlier, by someone else. His handshake was firm, brief. "It's great to finally meet you. Chloe talks about you all the time." "All good things, I hope," I said, settling into my chair. "Only good things," he said, smiling in a way that looked practiced, though not unkind. The dinner started pleasantly enough. We talked about easy things, how he and Chloe met, his work in commercial real estate, a trip they were thinking about taking in the spring. He asked me a few questions about my catering business, nodded along politely as I answered, though I noticed his eyes drifted to his phone once or twice during my explanation of how I'd built the company from nothing after the divorce. "That's impressive," he said when I finished. "Small business ownership is no joke. My family's always been more on the investment side of things. Real estate holdings, some private equity. Less hands-on than what you do." "Sounds like a different kind of work," I said. "Very different," he agreed, and there was something in the way he said it. Not rude exactly, but with a faint edge of distinction, like he was drawing a line between categories of success without quite meaning to say it out loud. "My father's actually fairly well known in certain circles here. Sterling Properties. You might have heard of it." I hadn't, but I nodded anyway, the way you do when someone expects recognition you don't actually have. "We're a pretty tight-knit family," he continued, "very involved in each other's lives. My mother especially cares a lot about presentation, I guess you'd say. Family events, that kind of thing. She's going to want to meet you properly at some point." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it, even as something small and unplaceable settled uneasily in my chest at the word presentation. Throughout dinner, I noticed little things. The way his eyes flicked briefly, almost involuntarily, over my blouse and earrings when I first sat down. A quick assessment I doubt he was even conscious of making. The way he addressed most of his questions to Chloe rather than me, checking in with her expression before answering things fully himself, like he was reading her reactions as much as mine. He wasn't cold. He was polite, attentive to Chloe, generous with the wine list. But there was a distance to him, a kind of careful measuring that I couldn't quite shake off even by the time dessert arrived. Chloe, for her part, seemed happy. Genuinely happy. The kind of happy where she laughed easily and touched his arm without thinking about it. The kind of comfortable I hadn't seen in her in a long time, not since before the boutique closed. That mattered to me more than any small discomfort I felt at the table. If he made her feel that settled, that secure, I was willing to give him time. We said our goodbyes outside the restaurant, Julian shaking my hand again, telling me it was wonderful to finally meet me, that he hoped we'd do this again soon. Chloe walked me to my car while he waited a polite distance away, scrolling his phone. "So? What did you think?" she asked, practically bouncing on her heels. "He seems very put together," I said carefully. "Polite. I can tell he cares about you." "He really does, Ma." She beamed, then hesitated for a second, glancing back toward him before lowering her voice slightly. "Hey, so, next time we all get together, maybe with his parents or whoever, do you think you could, dress a little different? Not different, just more put together? His family's kind of particular about that stuff, and I just want everything to go smoothly." I let that comment about how I dressed sit with me longer than I probably should have. In the end, I didn't say anything back to her that night. Just told her I'd keep it in mind, and drove home with my hands a little tighter on the wheel than usual. The Sterling family gathering happened about a month later at their house out in the hills. The kind of place with a circular driveway and a housekeeper who answered the door before we even reached it. I'd bought a new dress for the occasion. Nothing outrageous, just a step up from what I'd normally wear. A soft gray sheath I thought struck the right balance between comfortable and presentable. Chloe glanced at it when she picked me up and gave a small approving nod, which felt, at the time, like a strange thing to need from your own daughter. Inside, the house was full of people I didn't know. Drinks in hand, moving between a living room the size of my entire first floor and a patio that opened out onto a pool. Julian's mother, a slim woman named Diane with a handshake like she was testing the firmness of a peach, greeted me warmly enough at the door. "Elena, we've heard so much about you," she said, though her eyes moved past me almost immediately to Chloe, taking in her dress with obvious approval before returning to me. Come in, come in. Let me introduce you around. The introductions came fast, names and titles blending together, someone on the board of a private club, a man who did something in venture capital, a couple who'd just come back from a golf trip somewhere in Scotland. Every conversation seemed to circle around property values, investment portfolios. Which country club had the better back nine? I stood at the edge of most of these clusters, nodding, occasionally offering a comment when I had one, mostly just absorbing a world that felt entirely foreign to me, despite standing right in the middle of it. At one point, Diane pulled me aside near the appetizer table, refilling her wine glass while making polite conversation. "So, Chloe tells me you run a catering business," she said, gesturing vaguely at the spread in front of us. Little tarts, some kind of shrimp arrangement, clearly done by an actual catering staff for the party. That's wonderful. Honestly, I think it's such important work. Feeding people, taking care of all the little details nobody else wants to deal with. It's a noble little trade, really. I felt the comment land somewhere just slightly off, though I couldn't have told you exactly why in the moment. Noble little trade. There was a smile attached to it, warm enough on the surface, but something underneath it that made it feel less like a compliment and more like she was placing me carefully into a category. Useful, humble, adjacent to the family rather than part of it. "It's been good to me," I said simply. "Built it from nothing after my divorce. Puts food on the table and Chloe's, for a long time." Of course," Diane said, patting my arm lightly, already glancing over my shoulder toward someone else she clearly wanted to greet. "It's very admirable." I glanced over at Chloe, who was standing a few feet away with Julian and two of his cousins, and caught the tail end of a joke someone made. I didn't catch the whole thing, just a fragment about caterers versus consultants. Something light, tossed off easily in that particular way. People make jokes when they don't think anyone in the group could be offended by them. Chloe laughed. A small laugh. Easy. Automatic. The kind you give when you're trying to fit smoothly into a conversation, not thinking too hard about who else might be standing close enough to hear it. I didn't say anything. I just stood there for a second, a shrimp tart still untouched on the little plate in my hand, watching my daughter laugh along with people who'd just, gently and politely, made my life's work sound like a hobby. And waiting, without quite meaning to, for her to glance my way and see if I'd heard it too. I noticed it in pieces, the way you notice a season changing. Not one dramatic moment. Just small shifts that added up over a few months. The first thing was her voice. Not dramatically different, but there was a new cadence to it sometimes, especially when she talked about Julian's world. A slight polish to certain words, a way of pausing before saying things like, "We're doing brunch at the club," that made it sound like a phrase she'd practiced. I noticed it on a phone call one Sunday when she mentioned a little soirée one of Julian's cousins was hosting. Soirée. Chloe had never used that word in her life before that spring. The second thing was smaller. And honestly, I might not have noticed it at all if I hadn't been the one who gave her half of what was in her closet. I stopped by one afternoon to drop off some leftover catering desserts from an event. She loved my lemon tarts. Always had. And while she was in the kitchen finding a container, I glanced through the open bedroom door and saw her closet, doors ajar. The purse I'd bought her for her 21st birthday, a nice leather one I'd saved up for, was pushed to the back corner of the shelf. In its place, closer to the front, sat two newer bags I didn't recognize, sleek and structured, with little gold hardware that looked expensive in a way I could tell even without knowing brands. A pair of shoes I remembered her wearing constantly last year, Comfortable flats, she used to say, were the only ones that don't kill my feet by 5 o'clock. Sat untouched near the back, dust actually visible on the toe. I didn't say anything. What would I even say? I noticed you're not wearing the shoes I bought you. It sounded absurd, even forming it in my head. People's tastes change. She had new money habits now, new company, new things she cared about presenting. That was normal, I told myself. That's what growing up looks like sometimes, trying on a new version of yourself to see if it fits. Still, there was something quietly hollow about watching it happen from a distance, piece by piece. Not betrayal, exactly, just a small, steady sense of things I'd given her, not just objects, but the person she used to be around me, slowly getting tucked toward the back of a closet. I brought it up once, lightly, trying to keep my tone easy. We were on a video call, and I mentioned, half joking, I don't see you in that green dress much anymore, the one you loved so much last summer. She laughed, a little too quick. Oh, I don't know. I guess my style's just changing. Julian's family does a lot of dressier stuff, so I've been leaning into that more, I guess. Makes sense, I said, and let it go. A few weeks later, we were on another call, a Tuesday evening, nothing planned, just catching up the way we usually did. She was propped up against pillows, and I could see behind her what looked like an unfamiliar living room. High ceilings, a large window, furniture that didn't match anything I remembered from her apartment. "Where are you?" I asked. "That's not your place." "Oh, yeah, I'm at Julian's parents' house actually. Staying for a couple days, his mom wanted to do this whole thing with wedding magazines, even though we're not even engaged yet. It's kind of funny actually." Behind her, a door opened somewhere off-screen, and I heard a voice. Diane's, I was fairly sure. Say something I couldn't quite make out. "Sorry, one sec," Chloe said, and then, almost too fast. "Actually, Ma, can I call you back later? It's kind of a mess in here right now. Boxes everywhere from the magazine shoot thing. I don't want you seeing this chaos." Before I could answer, the screen went black. The engagement happened faster than I expected, honestly. One phone call in early spring, Chloe practically shrieking with excitement, holding her hand up to the camera to show me a ring that probably cost more than my first car. I cried a little, genuinely happy for her, and told her so. The engagement dinner was at a private dining room in a restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices. Julian's father, Richard, was there for the first time. A broad-shouldered man with silver hair and the kind of handshake that felt like it was evaluating something. Diane sat beside him, glowing, already talking about venues before we'd even ordered drinks. I sat toward the middle of the table, Chloe and Julian across from me, and for the first 20 minutes or so, it felt almost warm. Richard asked me a few questions about my business, seemed genuinely curious for a moment about how catering logistics worked for large events. I found myself relaxing slightly, thinking maybe I'd misjudged the family. Maybe that comment from Diane months ago had just been an awkward one-off. Then the conversation shifted, the way it always seemed to at these gatherings, toward things I had no real foothold in. Richard started talking about a trust he was setting up for Julian, something tied to the family's holding company, mentioning names of properties and business partners like they were common knowledge. Diane chimed in about a charity gala she was co-chairing, dropping names of other committee members, laughing about some minor scandal involving someone's seating arrangement at last year's event. I nodded along where I could, offered a comment when there was an opening, but mostly I just ate my dinner and let the conversation move around me like a current I wasn't quite swimming in. Then Richard set down his wine glass and turned his attention more directly toward Chloe, his voice taking on a slightly more formal tone, the kind you use when you're saying something you've clearly said before, to other people, in other rooms. "You know," he said, "the Sterling name carries a certain weight in this city. 4 generations, built carefully, protected carefully. We take that very seriously. Reputation, legacy, how the family presents itself publicly. He glanced briefly at Julian, then back to Chloe, smiling in a way that seemed warm on the surface. Julian knows this. It's part of what it means to marry into this family. We expect everyone connected to us, publicly, socially, to understand that and honor it. It was said lightly, almost like a toast, but something about it landed heavier than the tone suggested. Everyone connected to us. I felt that phrase settle in my chest, unsure exactly who it was aimed at, though some instinct told me it wasn't only meant for Julian. Chloe smiled and nodded along, said something gracious about how honored she was to be part of the family, how much she respected what they'd built. Her voice was smooth, practiced sounding in that same new way I'd been noticing for months now. Under the table, I felt her hand find mine. She didn't look at me when she did it, kept her eyes on Richard, kept the polite smile fixed on her face. But her fingers wrapped around mine and squeezed. Once, firm and quick, the way you squeeze someone's hand when you can't say the thing you actually want to say out loud. I squeezed back, not entirely sure what the gesture was apologizing for, or reassuring me about, or asking me to simply endure. Dinner continued around us, Richard moving on to some story about a business trip to Geneva, Diane laughing at the right moments, and I sat there with my daughter's hand quietly holding mine beneath the table, wondering what exactly she thought I needed forgiving for, and whether she even knew the answer herself. I brought it up myself, actually, a couple weeks after the engagement dinner. We were at my kitchen table again, the same table where the boutique conversation had started years earlier, and something about that felt fitting, though I didn't dwell on it at the time. "I want to pay for the wedding," I said, setting down 2 mugs of coffee. "Whatever you two need. I know Julian's family has money, but this is my daughter's wedding. I want to be part of it in a real way." Chloe's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. Not the polished, practiced brightness I'd started noticing around Julian's circle, but something more familiar, more like the girl who used to spread mood boards across this same table years ago. "Ma, are you serious? You don't have to do that. His parents already offered." "I know they did. I want to do this too." And I meant it. Some part of me, if I'm honest, wanted a real seat at the table of this wedding, not just financially, but in the sense of it, in the memory of it. I didn't want to be a guest at my own daughter's biggest day. I wanted to have built part of it. She grabbed her laptop before I'd even finished my coffee, that same old excitement flooding back into her voice as she pulled up folders full of screenshots, venues, florists, a specific photographer she'd been following on Instagram for 2 years, dress designers with names I didn't recognize, but that she said with a kind of reverence. For a little while, it felt like the boutique days again. She'd show me something, gauge my reaction, adjust her pitch slightly, laugh when I made a joke about some absurdly priced item, a $4,000 ice sculpture, for instance, that we both agreed was ridiculous and immediately vetoed together. There was an ease to it I'd missed without fully realizing how much. "Okay, so, roughly," she said, pulling up a spreadsheet she'd apparently already built out. "Here's kind of where we're landing budget-wise." She turned the screen toward me. I scanned down the column of numbers: venue, catering, florals, photography, dress, decor, and felt my stomach do a small, quiet drop as the total at the bottom came into view. "Chloe, this says $52,000. "I know it sounds like a lot," she said quickly, already moving to explain before I could react further. "But that's actually kind of standard for the venues Julian's family circle uses. Like, genuinely on the lower end compared to some of the weddings we've been to this year. The venue alone is non-negotiable. It's where his cousin got married, and it's kind of expected." $52,000, I repeated, mostly to myself, doing the math against what I had available, what that would mean for my savings. for the cushion I'd spent years rebuilding after the boutique. I mean, I'm not saying you have to cover literally all of it, she added, a little faster now, sensing the shift in my expression. His parents are doing the rehearsal dinner and some of the flowers. This is kind of the number for everything else. I sat with it for a moment, looking at that spreadsheet, at the careful little formulas she'd built, calculating subtotals and tax estimates, clearly having put real thought into it, the same way she'd put real thought into the boutique's mood board all those years ago. Thought, yes, but maybe not quite enough friction against reality yet. Not enough of the lived experience that tells you $52,000 is not, in fact, a modest number, no matter which circles consider it one. It's a lot of money, sweetheart, I said carefully. She reached over and squeezed my hand, the same gesture from the engagement dinner, except lighter now, more hopeful than apologetic. I know, Ma, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, right? It's not like I'm asking for this every year. She smiled, that old warmth spreading across her face, genuinely happy, genuinely trusting that I'd find a way, the way I always had. It'll be worth it, I promise. This is the one day I really want to get right. The $52,000 number turned out to be more of a starting point than a ceiling, which I probably should have expected but somehow didn't. It started small. A florist Chloe loved was booked, so we needed a different one, slightly pricier. Then the dress she'd fallen in love with needed alterations that ran nearly $2,000 on their own. French lace, hand-sewn beading, the kind of work that apparently doesn't come cheap no matter who's doing it. Then the venue added a service fee we hadn't budgeted for. Then the catering company Julian's mother recommended. Not mine, of course. There was never a real conversation about me handling any part of the food, which stung a little more than I let myself admit. Came back with a quote nearly $10,000 over what Chloe had originally estimated. Each time, the ask came the same way. A text, usually, or a quick phone call. Ma, so there's this one extra thing. She'd start, and I'd feel my stomach tighten slightly before she even finished the sentence. She always had a reason. A good one even, most of the time. Nothing frivolous on its face. Just the accumulated weight of just this one more thing repeated across months of planning. I stopped pushing back after the third or fourth time, not because I'd stopped noticing the numbers climbing, but because every time I raised a concern, even gently, I got the same response. A flicker of hurt in her voice, a quiet, "I just really want this to be perfect, Ma," that made me feel like the problem wasn't the money, it was me, for making her feel bad about wanting things to be nice. So I paid. I moved money out of savings I'd built back up slowly since the boutique closed. I picked up 2 extra catering jobs a month, working weekends I would have normally kept for myself, just to keep the cushion from disappearing entirely. I didn't tell her any of this. Old habits. I'd spent years perfecting the art of looking like everything was fine, and I wasn't about to break that streak now. Not during wedding planning. Not when every conversation with her had this fragile, hopeful energy. I didn't want to be the one to puncture. The final invoice that pushed the whole thing past $52,000 came in on a Thursday night. The catering total. Finalized. Plus a decor add-on Chloe had approved without mentioning to me first. Some kind of floral archway that cost more than my first car payment plan combined. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, scrolling through the itemized bill, my coffee gone cold beside me. I didn't call her to argue about it. What was there to argue, really? It was already booked, already confirmed, the deposit already paid from an account I'd need to refill before the next mortgage payment came due. I just clicked, approve on the final balance, typed in the card number from memory, and hit submit. Then I sat there for a moment in my quiet kitchen, laptop screen glowing in front of me, the number on the confirmation page still visible. Total paid to date, just over $52,000, not counting the $24,000 in maintenance fees I'd already quietly poured into the apartment, not counting the $55,000 from the boutique I'd never really expected back in the first place. I closed the laptop slowly. The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock over the stove, the same sounds that had filled this room on countless nights over the past 8 years while I sat here alone doing math that never quite seemed to end. I let out a long breath, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper than your lungs, and sat there in the dark for a while, not quite ready yet to go to bed. The seating chart came up almost as an afterthought, tucked into a longer email Chloe forwarded me with a subject line that just said, "Quick thing!" 3 exclamation points, which usually meant she wanted me to skim past whatever came next without dwelling on it too long. I called her that evening instead of texting back, mostly because the attached diagram had confused me. Little numbered circles, names penciled into some, blank in others, and my own name sitting at a table near the very edge of the layout, close to what the venue coordinator had labeled, in small gray text, "Service Corridor." "Hey, so I saw the seating chart," I said, keeping my voice light. "Looks like I'm at table 14? "Oh, yeah." Chloe's voice came through a little too bright, a little too fast, the way it did now whenever she anticipated a conversation might get uncomfortable. "That's actually kind of intentional, Ma. Let me explain." "Okay. So the head table and the tables right around it are for, like, the immediate wedding party and close family, Julian's parents, his grandparents, his siblings. And I just figured, since it's mostly going to be photos happening around that area all night, it'd be easier logistically if I'm further away," I said, finishing the sentence for her. Not unkindly, just plainly. "It's not about that, Ma, I promise. It's literally just about photo flow. The photographer said it's easier if the head table area stays kind of small and consistent, so the pictures don't look cluttered with too many people milling around." She said it fast, rehearsed sounding, the way she'd sounded explaining the $52,000 budget months earlier. "You're still at a great table, I promise. You'll be near Aunt Carol and some of my old family friends. It's not like you're in some bad spot." I looked again at the little gray label on the diagram, "Service Corridor," and thought about how near the kitchen and near the photo backdrop were not, in fact, interchangeable considerations, no matter how the explanation was dressed up. "Chloe, I paid for over half this wedding," I said, still keeping my tone even, not sharp, just honest. "I think it would mean a lot to me to be closer to the family table, not even the head table, just closer." There was a pause on the line, longer than I expected. "I mean, I get that," she said finally, "but it's kind of already set, Ma. The coordinator's locked in the floor plan for the rental company. And honestly, it's really not that deep. It's literally just about where people are sitting for a few hours. It's not, like, a statement about anything." "I didn't say it was a statement." "I know, I don't want you to make this into something it's not," she said, a slight edge creeping into her voice now, defensive in a way I hadn't heard from her in a long time. "It's not personal. It's just logistics. Please don't make this a whole thing." I sat with that for a second, phone pressed to my ear, staring at nothing in particular across my living room. "It's fine," I said quietly. "Table 14 is fine." "Really? You're not upset?" "I'm not upset," I said, though something in my own voice sounded thinner than I meant it to. "It's your day. Whatever makes it easier." We talked another few minutes about something else. The rehearsal dinner menu, I think. Though I honestly don't remember much of what either of us said after that. When we hung up, I sat there in my chair for a long moment, the phone resting face down on my knee, and realized my jaw had been clenched the entire back half of the conversation without my noticing. It wasn't the table. Not really. It was the ease of it. How quickly, how smoothly, the explanation had come, like she'd thought it through in advance. Like this particular ask hadn't cost her a moment's hesitation the way the money always seemed to. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the familiar reflex to smooth things over, to tell myself I was overreacting, to fold the discomfort quietly away where it wouldn't inconvenience anyone. I just sat there, quiet, my face doing something I couldn't quite see but could feel. A stillness that wasn't acceptance. Not this time. Just something settling, cold and unfamiliar, low in my chest. The rehearsal dinner was held at a private club Julian's family belonged to, one of those places with a strict dress code and a doorman who checks names off a list before letting you past the lobby. I got there a few minutes early, smoothed down my dress in the mirror of my car, and walked in trying to look like I belonged there. Inside, the room was already filling up. Julian's extended family, a handful of college friends, a few of Chloe's co-workers from a marketing job she'd taken after the boutique closed. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, and somewhere near the back, I caught a flash of a face I actually recognized. Elena? Elena Vance? It was Marcus, a bartender I'd worked events with years ago, back when I was building the catering business and picking up whatever gigs I could to network. He was working this one, tray balanced expertly on one hand, grinning wide when he spotted me. "Marcus, I didn't know you still did private events." "Still grinding," he laughed. "Man, it's been what, 5 years? You look great. Heard this is your daughter's wedding? Congrats. That's huge." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice like we were sharing something. "You should see the kitchen setup back there. It's insane. Chef's using a full brigade for tomorrow." We talked for a couple minutes, easy and warm, the kind of conversation that didn't require translation or explanation, just two people who understood the same world speaking the same language. It was, honestly, the most comfortable I'd felt since walking through the door. When he moved on to refill other glasses, I turned back toward the main room and spotted Chloe near the center, laughing with a cluster of Julian's cousins, champagne flute in hand, radiant in a way that made my chest ache with pride, even through everything else swirling underneath it. I made my way over, and she saw me coming, waved me in with a bright smile. "Everyone, this is—" she started, gesturing toward me, and I felt myself brace slightly, waiting for the familiar words. "My mom. This is my mom." Words I'd heard 1,000 times over the years, at school events, at birthday parties, words that had never once felt like they needed examining until this exact moment. "Family from my side," Chloe finished instead, smiling easily at the group, already turning back toward whatever story one of the cousins had been telling before I walked up. "Anyway, so continue? You were saying about the boat trip?" The cousins glanced my way for half a beat, offered polite, forgettable smiles, then returned their attention to Chloe and the story, which resumed exactly where it had left off, as if I'd simply passed through the edge of the conversation rather than entered it. I stood there for a moment, champagne flute in hand that I didn't remember picking up, watching my daughter laugh at some punchline I hadn't caught, surrounded by people who had no idea, none at all, that the woman standing quietly at the edge of their circle had built the very foundation this entire glittering evening was resting on. Marcus passed by again a few minutes later, caught my eye from across the room, and gave me a small, genuine nod, the kind of acknowledgement that costs nothing, and somehow, in that moment, felt like the only real one I'd received all night. Chloe asked me to come by the apartment the night before the wedding. Just the two of us. No Julian, no wedding party, no bridesmaids doing face masks in the living room. "I just want it to be us for a little bit," she'd said on the phone, and something about her voice in that moment sounded almost like the daughter I remembered from before all of this, before the boutique, Before Julian, before $52,000 and seating charts and service corridors. I brought a bottle of sparkling cider, the same kind we'd used at the boutique opening years ago, and she laughed when she saw it. "Oh my God, I forgot about that. Full circle." She poured us each a glass, and we sat cross-legged on her living room floor like we used to when she was a teenager, back before either of us had any idea what the next several years would bring. For a while, it was easy. We looked through old photos on her phone. Her at 5 years old covered in flour from helping me bake. Her senior prom. The two of us at some forgettable 4th of July barbecue years back. She told me a story about Julian I hadn't heard before. Something small and sweet about how he'd remembered her coffee order after only meeting her once. I told her about the first wedding I ever catered on my own, how I'd nearly ruined the cake transporting it and had to fix the frosting with a butter knife in the venue parking lot 20 minutes before guests arrived. She laughed so hard at that one she nearly spilled her cider. It felt, for those few minutes, like the wall that had slowly been building between us over the past year had thinned out just enough to see through. Then, almost as an afterthought, she reached for her phone and pulled up something. A photo of a dress. Pale blush. Understated. "So, I know we already talked about your outfit kind of," she said, a little more carefully now. "But I was thinking, maybe something more like this? Just, soft, neutral tones. I sent something similar to Aunt Carol and a few of the others, too." I looked at the photo, then at her. "I thought I'd wear the navy, the one I wore to meet Julian's parents." "Right, no, that one's really pretty," she said quickly. The photographer mentioned that a lot of color variation in the family photos can look kind of chaotic, so we're trying to keep everyone in the immediate family shots in these softer, neutral palettes. It photographs really clean." "So, you want me in beige?" "Not beige exactly, just..." She hesitated, scrolling to another photo, a sage green this time. "Something that doesn't pull focus, I guess. You know how sometimes in pictures one person's outfit just kind of jumps out and it throws off the whole composition?" I understood, in a purely technical sense, what she was describing. I'd catered enough weddings myself to know photographers had opinions about color coordination, about not clashing with the bridesmaids, about avoiding anything that competed with the bride's dress. That part wasn't unreasonable on its face, but there was something underneath the request that had nothing to do with photography. Something I couldn't quite name yet but felt clearly enough. A pattern, stretching back through the seating chart, through family from my side, through months of small, careful adjustments asking me to take up just slightly less space than I naturally would. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice light, setting my cider glass down carefully on the coffee table. "I understand. You're not mad, right?" She was watching my face now, something searching in her expression, like part of her already knew this had cost more than she wanted it to. "It's such a small thing. I just want tomorrow to be perfect." I smiled at her, the kind of smile you give when you've decided, somewhere deep and quiet, that you're no longer going to hand over every reaction you're actually having. "I get it, sweetheart," I said, and it came out smooth, warm even, the exact tone she needed to hear. But something in me had already shifted, had already begun quietly cataloging, filing away, watching this pattern with a clarity I hadn't let myself have before. The morning of the wedding, I got to the venue early to help however I could. Not officially, since Chloe had hired a full coordination team, but out of habit more than anything. 20 years of catering events had trained my body to wake up early on wedding days whether I wanted to or not. The venue staff was already moving fast when I arrived, setting up chairs in neat rows, testing the sound system, hauling in the floral arches Chloe had picked out. I found the coordinator, a brisk young woman with a headset and a clipboard, and asked if there was anything useful I could do. Actually, Would you mind grabbing the final seating chart from the front table? Chloe wanted a hard copy at each table anyway, and we're a few short, she said, already moving on to the next fire she needed to put out. I walked over to the check-in table near the entrance, where a neat stack of printed cards sat waiting to be distributed. I picked up the master copy on top, meant to glance at it only long enough to confirm the table numbers matched what I'd seen weeks ago in that email. It didn't. The layout had changed. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone glancing at it quickly would notice. But I noticed. The head table now extended one seat further than before, absorbing a cousin who'd apparently been a late addition. And to make room, table assignments toward that end of the room had shifted slightly. Everyone bumped one position further out, everyone except, it seemed, the people whose names carried weight with the sterling side. I found my name near the bottom of the page. Table 16. Not 14, like before. 16. Even further from the head table than what we'd already discussed, tucked into a corner near a door marked, in small block letters, Kitchen Access. I stood there for a moment, the paper light in my hand, but somehow feeling heavier than that. Around me, the venue buzzed with activity. Florists arranging centerpieces, a string quartet doing a quiet sound check near the altar, someone laughing about a missing box of programs. Normal wedding chaos. Nobody paying any attention to a 55-year-old woman standing quietly by the check-in table with a piece of paper in her hand. Part of me wanted to find Chloe immediately, wanted to ask her, calmly, why this had changed again without anyone mentioning it to me. But I thought about the morning ahead of her. Hair and makeup starting in less than an hour, nerves already likely running high. This being, whatever else it was, still the biggest day of her life so far. I thought about what it would mean to walk into that getting ready suite with a complaint in my hand, instead of the calm, supportive presence she needed from me today. So I didn't say anything. Not yet. I folded the paper carefully instead, creasing it along its existing lines, and slipped it into the small clutch I'd brought with me. The same clutch that held my lipstick, a tissue, a spare bobby pin, ordinary things a mother brings to her daughter's wedding. The seating chart didn't belong with those things. Not really, but I put it there anyway, tucked flat against the lining, out of sight. I didn't decide, in that moment, exactly what I was going to do with it. I just knew I wasn't ready to let it go, and I wasn't ready to say anything out loud yet either. I zipped the clutch shut, smoothed down the front of my dress, and walked toward the getting ready suite to check on my daughter, the folded paper sitting quiet and unspoken against my side the whole way there. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I'll give them that. Chloe looked radiant walking down the aisle, and when she reached Julian, I cried the way any mother would. The seating chart tucked away and forgotten for those few minutes, nothing in my chest but pure, uncomplicated pride. Then the reception started, and reality found its way back in. Table 16 was exactly where the paper had said it would be. Tucked into the far corner of the ballroom, close enough to the kitchen doors that I could hear the clatter of pans every time a server pushed through with a fresh tray. The centerpiece at my table was smaller than the ones I'd glimpsed near the front, a simple arrangement instead of the elaborate floral towers surrounding the head table. My tablemates were pleasant enough, a second cousin of Julian's I'd never met, a retired colleague of Richard's, an elderly aunt who mostly talked about her garden. Nice people. Just not anyone who had any real connection to the day, or to me. I sat there through the first course, watching servers move confidently through the room, and recognized one of them almost immediately. A young woman named Priya, who'd interned with me 2 summers back before finishing culinary school. Her face lit up when she spotted me. "Elena, oh my gosh. I didn't know this was your daughter's wedding," she said, crouching slightly beside my chair to keep her voice low, professional instincts still intact even mid-service. "Wait, why are you all the way back here? Let me talk to the coordinator. I'm sure we can move you up closer. There's extra room near—" No, it's fine," I said quickly, touching her arm lightly. Really, I appreciate it, but I don't want to make a fuss. It's a lovely table. Priya hesitated, clearly unconvinced, glancing toward the front of the room and back at me. You sure? It wouldn't be any trouble. I'm sure. Go on, you've got a room full of people to feed. I smiled at her, and after a beat she nodded and moved on, though she glanced back once over her shoulder before disappearing into the kitchen. I appreciated the offer more than I let on, but some tired, practical part of me knew that making a visible scene about table placement, even a quiet, polite one, would only give people something to whisper about at exactly the moment I least wanted to be talked about. So I stayed where I was, ate my dinner, made small talk with the garden aunt about her tomatoes, and watched the party unfold from a comfortable distance, the way you watch a play from the very back row of a theater. Close enough to follow the story, far enough that you're never quite part of it. Dinner wrapped up, and the DJ made an announcement about toasts, followed by cake cutting, followed by the part I'd actually been looking forward to despite everything: the family photos. I'd worn the navy after all. In a small, quiet act of defiance nobody had commented on so far, and I found myself straightening my dress slightly in my seat, getting ready to make my way toward the designated photo area near the garden doors. That's when I saw Chloe detach herself from a cluster of guests near the dance floor and start walking toward my table. Not gliding the easy, confident way she usually moved through a room full of people who adored her. This was different. Quicker steps. Something tight around her mouth. Her eyes flicking toward Diane and Richard standing near the photo backdrop before finding mine again. She reached the edge of my table and crouched down slightly, the same way Priya had, except there was nothing relaxed about it this time. "Ma," she said, voice low, a little breathless. "Can I talk to you for a second, before the family photos start?" I stood up, smoothing my dress, and stepped a few feet away from the table with her, toward a quieter corner near the kitchen doors. Fitting, I'd think later, that even this conversation happened closest to where I'd been seated all night. "What's going on?" I asked. Chloe glanced back once more toward the photo area, where Diane was already arranging people into position, gesturing with the particular authority of someone used to being obeyed at events like this. Then she turned back to me, and I watched her take a small breath, the kind you take before saying something you've rehearsed but still don't fully want to say. "So, the photographer's about to do the immediate family shots," she said, her voice low and careful, each word placed like she was walking across something fragile. "Just, like, parents, siblings, grandparents. Very tight group. Okay." And Diane mentioned, she just thinks, for the composition, it should really just be Julian's parents and grandparents, plus you and me, obviously. But she hesitated, and I watched her eyes flick briefly toward the navy dress I was wearing, then back up to my face. "She kind of suggested that maybe you head out a little early, before the photos, just so the group stays really tight and matches, you know, aesthetically. It's not personal, Ma, I promise. It's literally just a photography thing." I stood there for a moment, absorbing it, and something about the phrasing struck me even through the sting of it. She kind of suggested, "Not I want. Not even we thought. She." Diane's fingerprints were all over this sentence, and Chloe was simply the messenger standing in front of me, delivering lines that didn't sound like they'd started in her own head. "You want me to leave," I said quietly, "before the family photos." "Not leave," she said quickly, backpedaling slightly, though not far enough to actually change what she was asking. "I mean, you could stay for the reception stuff after, obviously. For this one part, it would just be easier if it was, like, a cleaner group. Ma, please don't make this a whole thing. I really don't have the bandwidth right now. Today's already so much—" There it was again. "Don't make this a whole thing. The same phrase from the seating chart conversation, the same careful management of my reaction before I'd even had one. I didn't yell. I want to be clear about that, because I think about this moment a lot, and I know it would have been easier, in some ways, to have exploded right there, thrown the whole night into chaos, made a scene loud enough that everyone in that ballroom would have understood exactly what was happening. Some petty, wounded part of me almost wanted to, but that's not who I am. And more than that, in that specific moment, something inside me had gone very quiet and very still, past the point of wanting to fight it. "Okay," I said. Chloe blinked, clearly braced for more resistance than that. "Okay? You're... okay. You're not upset?" I said, "Okay, sweetheart." My voice came out smooth, almost gentle, though I could feel something underneath it that had nothing gentle left in it at all. Something had simply broken, cleanly, without noise, the way a dish doesn't shatter loudly if you set it down carefully enough on the floor before it falls. I reached out and touched her arm briefly, the way I had 1,000 times over 23 years, and gave her a small, calm smile. "Go take your photos," I said. "I'll see you at the reception." She hesitated, something flickering across her face. Relief, maybe, or the faintest edge of guilt she didn't have time to sit with. Then she nodded, said something quick about texting me later, and turned to walk back toward the photo backdrop, back toward Diane already scanning the room to make sure everything was, once again, exactly where it needed to be. I watched her go for a second. Then I turned the other direction, walked calmly past table 16 without stopping to collect my things, and made my way toward the exit. My heels quiet against the ballroom floor, my face arranged into the same pleasant, composed expression I'd worn all night, the kind of calm that isn't peace at all, but something much closer to a decision already being made. I made it to my car before I let my hands shake. Just for a second, gripping the steering wheel in the parking lot, engine not even started yet, the valet still walking back toward the entrance behind me. Then I took a breath. The kind you take when you've decided something and there's no use pretending otherwise, and I started the car. I didn't cry on the drive home. I want to say that clearly, because I think people expect that part, and it didn't happen. What happened instead was quieter and, in its own way, more unsettling. A kind of clarity settling over me, mile by mile, the streetlights sliding past the windshield while my mind ran through 8 years of numbers with a precision I hadn't let myself access in a long time. 55,000 for the boutique, 380,000 for the apartment, 24,000 in maintenance fees nobody but Denise and I had ever known about, 52,000 for a wedding where I'd been asked, twice now, to make myself smaller, first at the edges of a seating chart, then out of a family photograph entirely. About 10 minutes from home, stopped at a red light. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in almost 2 years, Nadia, the lawyer who'd drawn up the boutique agreement all that time ago. It was late on a Saturday night. I called anyway. She picked up on the 4th ring, her voice groggy but alert once she recognized my number. "Elena, is everything okay? I need you to do something for me," I said. My own voice sounded strange to me, steady, flat. Nothing like the woman who'd been standing near a kitchen door 20 minutes earlier fighting back tears. The agreement we drew up for Chloe's boutique loan, the equity contract. I remember it. "What's going on?" The light turned green. I pulled forward, phone propped against my shoulder, hands steady now on the wheel in a way they hadn't been in the parking lot. "I want to activate the default clause," I said. "The full terms, repayment on the original loan amount, plus recovery of the equity stake given the business no longer exists." There was a pause on the line, the sound of Nadia shifting, maybe sitting up in bed, maybe reaching for a pen. "Elena, that clause has been dormant for years. Are you sure you want to reopen that? Given the amounts and the relationship involved?" That's a significant step. I'm sure. And the apartment, I continued, before she could ask anything further. It's still in my name only, correct? No joint ownership? Nothing transferred? Correct. Deed's always been solely yours. I want a formal notice sent. 30 days to vacate, unless the outstanding boutique loan is settled in full first. I heard myself say it, clear and precise, each word landing exactly where I meant it to. Everything. All of it. Activate the whole clause. Another pause, longer this time. Elena, I want to make sure you're not making this decision emotionally. Tonight of all nights. This isn't something we can easily undo once the notices go out. I'm not being emotional, I said. And strangely, in that moment, it was true. Whatever had broken in me back at that ballroom had already finished breaking. What was left now was simply arithmetic, clean, cold, and long overdue. I've been more than patient, Nadia. I want this handled properly. Send everything Monday morning. She agreed. Finally, said she'd have the paperwork ready first thing. I thanked her, hung up, and drove the rest of the way home in silence, the wedding still going on somewhere behind me, cake probably being cut right about now, guests laughing under string lights I'd helped pay for. I didn't think about it again that night. I went inside, took off the navy dress, hung it carefully in my closet, and went to sleep without setting an alarm for the first time in months. 7 days later, on a quiet Saturday morning, a courier walked up to the door of a downtown penthouse apartment, the one deeded solely in my name, and left a thick envelope tucked against the frame, addressed jointly to Chloe Vance and Julian Sterling. Chloe called me 9 times that Saturday. I watched the phone light up on my kitchen counter over and over and let every single one go to voicemail. Not out of cruelty. I just needed to hear whatever she had to say when I was ready. Not while my hands were still busy kneading dough for a Monday event. Not while I was still deciding what version of myself was going to answer. She showed up in person that evening instead, pounding on my door hard enough that I heard it from the kitchen. "Ma, open the door, please. We need to talk about this." I let her in. She looked wrecked, makeup smudged from crying, still in the sweatpants she'd probably thrown on the second the envelope hit their door. Julian wasn't with her, which I noted. "You're really doing this," she said, not quite a question. "You're actually suing me." "I'm not suing you," I said, staying calm, gesturing for her to sit at the same table where all of this had started, years ago, mood boards and takeout containers. "I'm enforcing a contract we both signed. You knew what it said. That was for the boutique, not this, not kicking me out of my home. It's not your home, Chloe." I said it gently, but plainly. "It's mine. It's always been mine. I let you live there. That's different." She stared at me like I'd slapped her, and I understood why. I'd never once, in 4 years, said it that directly to her face. Julian called 2 days later. Not Chloe, him. Polished as ever, even under pressure. "Ms. Vance, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. We're happy to discuss some kind of arrangement. Maybe you keep a stake in the apartment. We handle the optics of this quietly. Avoid anything messy getting out to our circle." "There's no misunderstanding," I told him. 30 days. Either the boutique loan is settled, or the apartment is vacated. Those are the terms you're welcome to review with your own attorney. He tried a few more angles over that call, offered to have his family make a gift of the apartment to smooth things over, mentioned, more than once, how it would look if this became public. I almost laughed at that part, as if I'd spent 8 years building something quietly out of love, only to suddenly care what his mother's dinner party guests might whisper about it now. "I'm not interested in optics, Julian," I said. "I'm interested in what's fair." He didn't have much to say after that. The truth is, I never set out years ago to build myself an exit like this. When Nadia first suggested keeping the deed solely in my name, back when I bought that apartment, I told myself it was just cleaner paperwork. When I insisted on the boutique contract, I told myself it was just being responsible. I didn't consciously build a trapdoor. But somewhere underneath all that caution, some part of me, the part that had already learned once from Arthur what it costs to hand everything over without protecting yourself, must have known exactly what she was doing. Chloe came back one more time, alone, the week after. No sweatpants this time. She looked more like herself, tired but composed, like she'd had a few days to actually sit with all of it instead of just reacting to it. "I don't have $55,000, Ma," she said quietly, sitting across from me. "I'm not going to pretend I do." "I know. So what do you want from me? Really? Not the legal stuff? What do you actually want?" I thought about that question longer than she probably expected me to. "I want you to decide what kind of daughter you want to be," I said finally. "Not for me. For yourself. You can find a way to pay this back. Slowly. Whatever you can manage. And we figure out the rest as mother and daughter, not landlord and tenant. Or you move out in 30 days. And we figure out what's left between us after that, without any money tangled up in it at all." She didn't answer right away. She just sat there, twisting a napkin in her hands, looking at me like she was seeing something in my face she hadn't let herself notice in a very long time. "I need to think," she finally said. "Take the time you need," I told her. "But Chloe, I'm not changing my mind. Not this time." She left without another word, and I sat alone at that kitchen table for a long while afterward. Not triumphant. Not exactly at peace either. Just steady, waiting to see which daughter would walk back through my door. If there's one thing this whole ordeal taught me, it's that love without boundaries isn't really love. It's just erosion, wearing you down piece by piece until there's nothing left of you to give anyone. Sometimes the hardest, most loving thing you can do for your child is finally say no. Maybe you've lived something like this yourself, given so much of yourself to someone you love that you started disappearing a little in the process. If any part of this story hit close to home, I'd really love to hear about it in the comments. And if you've got someone in your life you'd want to share this with, go ahead and send it their way. If you're new here, stick around. There's more stories like this one coming. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.